Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or painting their nails, she could be found at her grandfather's ranch, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old .22 rifle. Her grandfather, a retired Marine, had taught her that precision wasn't just about pulling a trigger. It was about discipline, patience, and respect for the weapon. When Sarah announced her intention to join the Army after high school, the reactions were mixed. Her parents worried about their daughter entering what they saw as a man's world. Her friends couldn't understand why she would choose military service over college parties and sorority life, but Sarah had made up her mind. She wanted to serve her country. And she had dreams of becoming something more than what her small town expected of her. Basic training at Fort Moore was everything Sarah had imagined, and worse. The drill sergeants were relentless, the physical demands exhausting, and the mental pressure constant. But what surprised her most wasn't the intensity of the training. It was the attitude of some of her fellow recruits, particularly the men who seemed to view her presence as some kind of joke. "Look at little Annie Oakley over there," Private Jackson would sneer during weapons training. "Bet she thinks she's some kind of sharpshooter because Daddy let her play with BB guns back home." The comments stung. But Sarah learned to keep her mouth shut and let her performance speak for itself. During the first week of marksmanship training, Sarah noticed something that made her heart sink. While she had grown up shooting, the military weapons were different beasts entirely. The M4 carbine felt foreign in her hands compared to her grandfather's old hunting rifles. The iron sights seemed off, the trigger pull was different, and the stance the instructors taught felt awkward after years of learning her grandfather's informal methods. Her first day at the range was a disaster. While other recruits managed to hit their targets with reasonable accuracy, Sarah's shots were scattered across the paper like confetti. Private Jackson and his buddies had a field day with her performance. "So much for the cowgirl," he laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess playing pretend back home doesn't count for much in the real world." Sergeant Williams, the primary marksmanship instructor, noticed Sarah's struggles but didn't offer much encouragement. "Martinez," he called out after her particularly bad round of shooting, "maybe you should focus on something more suited to your strengths. Ever consider becoming a cook?" The other recruits laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. That evening in the barracks, Sarah lay on her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling. Doubt crept into her mind like poison. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she had been fooling herself all these years. Maybe her grandfather's praise had been nothing more than the kind words of a loving relative, not an honest assessment of her abilities. But as she thought about giving up, she remembered something her grandfather had told her years ago. They had been sitting on his porch after a particularly good day of shooting, and he had grown serious in that way old soldiers sometimes do. "Sarah," he had said, "the difference between a good shot and a great shot isn't just natural talent. It's the willingness to fail, learn, and adapt. The military will try to break you down and build you back up in their image. Don't lose who you are in the process, but be willing to learn their way too." The next morning, Sarah approached Sergeant Williams before the training day began. "Sergeant, I know I'm struggling with the rifle configuration. Could you help me understand what I'm doing wrong?" She swallowed her pride and admitted, "I learned to shoot differently growing up, and I think I need to unlearn some habits." Williams looked surprised by her direct approach. Most struggling recruits either made excuses or quietly accepted failure. "Martinez, you willing to put in extra time after regular training hours?" When Sarah nodded eagerly, he continued, "All right. We'll start tonight, but I'm warning you. I'm going to tear apart everything you think you know about shooting and build it back up from scratch." True to his word, Williams was ruthless in his criticism during their evening sessions. He made Sarah hold the rifle in uncomfortable positions until her muscles screamed, forced her to practice the same sight alignment hundreds of times, and critiqued every tiny movement she made. "Your breathing is wrong," he would say. "Your grip is too tight. You're anticipating the recoil. Start over." For 2 weeks, Sarah's performance during regular training continued to be mediocre at best. Private Jackson's taunts grew more creative and cruel. "Hey Martinez, heard you're getting special tutoring from Williams," he said with a smirk. "Maybe he can teach you to hold a rifle like a soldier, instead of like you're trying to milk a cow." The other women in her unit began to distance themselves from her, not wanting to be associated with someone who was clearly struggling. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated, with only her evening training sessions with Williams providing any sense of progress. But progress was happening, even if it was invisible to everyone else. Williams had identified that Sarah's biggest challenge wasn't her natural ability. It was that she had learned to compensate for an old rifle's quirks in ways that didn't translate to military precision shooting. Her grandfather's rifle had a heavy trigger that required a strong pull, so she had developed a habit of yanking rather than squeezing. The sights on her grandfather's rifle were slightly off, so she had unconsciously learned to aim a little to the left. "You're fighting muscle memory that's been developing for years," Williams explained during one of their sessions. "It's like learning to write with your other hand. Everything feels wrong because your body wants to do what it's always done." He was teaching her to treat the military rifle not as a variation of what she knew, but as a completely different tool with its own requirements. Williams also noticed something else about Sarah that impressed him. Unlike many recruits who became frustrated when things didn't come easily, Sarah had an unusual ability to stay calm under pressure and accept criticism without becoming defensive. Most people, when you tell them they're doing everything wrong, they get angry or give up, he told her one evening. You just nod and ask how to fix it. That's a rare quality. As the third week of marksmanship training began, Sarah felt like she was starting to understand the weapon better. Her evening practice sessions had begun to feel more natural, and she could sense that something was clicking into place, but she hadn't had a chance to test her progress during regular training yet. The other recruits had stopped paying attention to her performance, assuming she was just another washout waiting to happen. Private Jackson had moved on to making fun of other recruits, apparently bored with Sarah's consistent mediocrity. Even Sergeant Williams maintained his stern, professional demeanor during regular training hours, giving no hint of the progress they had been making in private. Sarah knew that the real test would come soon. The unit was scheduled for their formal marksmanship qualification in just a few days. The test that would determine whether they were fit to continue with their military training or would be recycled to start over with another group. Everything she had worked for, all the extra hours and criticism and self-doubt, would come down to a single afternoon at the range. The night before qualification day, Sarah cleaned her rifle with unusual care. She had learned to appreciate the precision engineering of the weapon, understanding now how every component worked together to deliver accuracy. It was different from her grandfather's rifle, but not inferior, just designed for a different purpose. As she worked, she thought about all the people who had doubted her, including herself. Tomorrow would be her chance to prove that she belonged here, that the girl from the small Texas town could become a soldier worthy of respect. But more than that, it would be her chance to honor her grandfather's faith in her and show that his lessons, adapted and refined through Williams' training, had made her into something stronger than she had ever imagined possible. The morning of qualification day arrived gray and cold, with a steady wind that made the range flags snap like whips. Sarah woke before reveille, her stomach churning with nervous energy. She had been through this scenario 100 times in her mind, but now that the moment was here, all her preparation felt fragile and uncertain. During breakfast, the atmosphere among the recruits was tense. Everyone knew that failure to qualify meant starting basic training over again, extending their time in this challenging environment by months. Sarah picked at her eggs and toast, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Across the mess hall, Private Jackson was holding court with his usual group, making jokes about the upcoming test. "Today's the day we separate the real soldiers from the pretenders," he announced loudly enough for Sarah to hear. "Some people are going to find out that playing dress-up doesn't make you military material." His friends laughed, but Sarah noticed that some of them looked nervous too. For all his bravado, Jackson had been inconsistent during practice sessions. Sergeant Williams appeared at Sarah's table without warning. "Martinez, finish up and report to the armory 15 minutes early," he said in his usual gruff tone. "I want to do a final check on your rifle configuration." Sarah's heart skipped. Was something wrong with her weapon? But Williams' expression gave nothing away. At the armory, Williams handed Sarah her assigned rifle and watched as she performed her inspection routine. She checked the chamber, examined the bolt, and tested the trigger mechanism exactly as she had been taught. Everything felt solid and familiar now, so different from those first awkward days when the weapon had seemed like a foreign object. "Your grandfather teach you to inspect weapons like that?" Williams asked quietly. It was the first personal question he had asked her in all their weeks of training together. "Yes, Sergeant. He said a soldier's rifle is their most important tool, and you have to know it better than you know yourself," Sarah replied. Williams nodded slowly. "Smart man. What did he do in the service?" "He was a Marine sniper in Vietnam, Sergeant. 2 tours." For the first time since she had known him, Williams' stern expression softened slightly. "That explains a few things. Marines know their way around precision shooting." He paused, then added, "Your grandfather would be proud of how hard you've worked these past few weeks." The comment caught Sarah off guard. Williams had never offered praise before. Only correction and criticism. "Thank you, Sergeant. I hope I can prove that his training meant something." "Martinez," Williams said, his voice returning to its normal commanding tone. "You've already proven that. Today is just about showing everyone else." He handed her the rifle. "Remember everything we practiced. Trust your training, not your nerves." The march to the rifle range felt longer than usual. Sarah found herself walking next to Private Chen, one of the quieter recruits who had consistently performed well during practice. "You ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I can be," Sarah replied. "You? Honestly? I'm terrified," Chen admitted. "I've been shooting well in practice, but this feels different. All that pressure." He looked around at their fellow recruits. "At least I don't have people expecting me to fail." Sarah appreciated his honesty. Most of the other recruits either avoided talking about the test or acted overly confident. "The pressure is definitely real," she agreed. "But I figure we've done the work. Now we just have to trust ourselves." At the range, the recruits were divided into groups and assigned to different firing lines. Sarah found herself in the same group as Jackson, which made her stomach tighten with additional anxiety. She could already imagine his commentary if she performed poorly. The qualification course was structured in phases. First, prone supported position at 300 meters, then prone unsupported at 200 meters, and finally kneeling unsupported at 100 meters. Each phase required hitting a certain number of targets within a specific time limit. There was no room for error. As they waited for their turn, Sarah noticed something interesting. Jackson, who had been so confident and talkative earlier, had grown quiet and was fidgeting with his equipment. His usual swagger was nowhere to be seen. Several other recruits who had performed well during practice also looked nervous, constantly checking and rechecking their rifles. "First group, move to the firing line," shouted the range safety officer. Sarah's group was third, which meant she had to watch 2 other groups shoot before her turn. She tried to use the time constructively, visualizing her shot sequence and reviewing Williams' instructions in her mind. The first group's performance was mixed. About half the recruits qualified easily, hitting their targets with confidence. The other half struggled, with some failing to meet the minimum standards. Sarah watched one recruit miss his first 5 shots at the 300-meter line, his frustration evident in his increasingly jerky movements. The range instructors marked his score sheet with obvious disappointment. The second group included several recruits who had been strong performers during practice. Sarah expected them to sail through the qualification, but the pressure seemed to be affecting even the skilled shooters. One woman who had consistently shot expert scores during training barely managed to qualify at the minimum level. Another recruit, who had been cocky about his abilities, failed the 200-meter phase completely when his shots went wild under the stress of the formal test. Second group, clear the line. Third group, move up, came the command. Sarah's heart hammered as she walked to her assigned firing position. The 300-meter targets looked impossibly small and distant. The wind had picked up, adding another variable to the already challenging shot. Sarah set up in the prone supported position, using her rucksack as a rest, exactly as she had practiced hundreds of times with Williams. She controlled her breathing, aligned the sights, and tried to block out everything except the fundamentals of marksmanship. The first shot felt good as it left the barrel, a clean break with good follow-through. Through her scope, She saw a hit in the black, close to center. Relief flooded through her, but she forced herself to maintain concentration. One good shot meant nothing if she couldn't repeat it consistently. The second shot also found the target, as did the third and fourth. By the time she finished the 300-meter phase, Sarah had hit 9 targets out of 10, well above the qualifying standard. Private Jackson, shooting 2 positions down from her, was having a different experience. Sarah could hear his frustration as he missed his first 3 shots. "Come on. Come on," he muttered between shots. His usual confidence, completely gone. His 4th shot hit the target, but barely. Sarah tried to focus on her own performance and ignore the drama playing out nearby. The 200-meter phase was where Williams had predicted Sarah might struggle. The prone, unsupported position was less stable, requiring more muscle control and breathing discipline. Sarah settled into her position and tried to recreate the calm focus she had developed during evening practice sessions. Her first shot at 200 meters was slightly off-center but still a solid hit. The second shot was better, almost perfectly centered. As she worked through the string of fire, Sarah realized something remarkable was happening. The weeks of intensive training with Williams had created muscle memory that was functioning almost automatically. Her body knew what to do, even while her mind was racing with nerves. By the time she finished the 200-meter phase, Sarah had hit 8 out of 10 targets. Combined with her 300-meter performance, she was well on her way to not just qualifying, but earning a respectable score. The realization gave her a boost of confidence as they prepared to move to the final phase. The 100-meter kneeling position was traditionally the most difficult part of the qualification course. The unsupported kneeling position was inherently unstable, and the shorter range meant that any small movements were magnified in their effect on accuracy. This was where many recruits' qualification attempts fell apart. Sarah knelt behind the firing line and set up her position carefully. Williams had spent considerable time working with her on this exact stance, teaching her how to create a stable shooting platform even without external support. She could almost hear his voice guiding her through the setup. Bone on bone, support. Natural point of aim. Consistent sight picture. The targets at 100 meters looked deceptively easy compared to the longer ranges, but Sarah knew that appearances were deceiving. She took her time with the first shot, ensuring perfect sight alignment before squeezing the trigger. Hit. The second shot was also on target. As she worked through the final phase, Sarah felt a growing sense of confidence and control. Meanwhile, Jackson was struggling badly. His performance at 300 and 200 meters had been marginal at best, and he needed to shoot almost perfectly at 100 meters to qualify. Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders and the increasingly frantic way he was adjusting his position between shots. His first 2 shots at the shorter range missed the target completely. Other recruits in their group were having mixed results. Chen, who had expressed such nervousness earlier, was shooting steadily and appeared to be qualifying easily. A recruit named Alvarez, who had been overconfident during practice, was barely hanging on after poor performance at the longer ranges. Sarah fired her final shot of the qualification course and knew immediately that it was a good hit. She had completed all 3 phases with scores well above the minimum requirements. As she waited for the range officials to tally the final scores, she felt a mixture of relief and pride that she had never experienced before. When the scores were announced, Sarah learned that she had not only qualified, but had earned a sharpshooter rating, the second highest level possible. Only 2 other recruits in her group had achieved the same rating, and none had earned the highest, expert designation. Jackson had failed to qualify entirely and would have to repeat the test with the next training cycle. As they walked back from the range, Sarah felt like she was floating. Weeks of doubt, criticism, and extra training had culminated in this moment of validation. She had proven to herself and everyone else that she belonged here, that her grandfather's faith in her abilities had been justified. But even in her moment of triumph, Sarah remained humble. She knew that this was just one test, one milestone in what would be a long journey. The real challenges lay ahead, in advanced training and eventual deployment. Still, she had overcome the first major obstacle and earned the respect that had been withheld from her for so long. 2 years later, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood on a different kind of range. This one in the mountains of Afghanistan, where the stakes were life and death rather than graduation from basic training. The journey from that nervous recruit struggling with rifle configuration to her current position as a designated marksman had been filled with challenges that made basic training look simple by comparison. After her success at rifle qualification, Sarah had been selected for advanced marksmanship training and eventually specialized sniper school. The training was grueling, pushing her physical and mental limits in ways she had never imagined. But the foundation that Sergeant Williams had helped her build during those evening practice sessions served her well. She had learned to adapt, to accept criticism, and to constantly improve her craft. Now, as part of a forward operating base in Kandahar province, Sarah had earned a reputation among her unit that was very different from her early days as a recruit. Her call sign was Long Shot. And soldiers who had initially been skeptical of having a woman in a combat role now requested her specifically for dangerous missions requiring precision shooting. The day that would change everything started like many others. Sarah's squad was providing overwatch security for a convoy moving through a particularly dangerous valley known for insurgent activity. Her position was on a ridgeline 800 meters from the road, with a clear view of potential ambush sites. The convoy included several vehicles carrying supplies and a group of visiting officials from the Department of Defense. Among them was General Patricia Hayes, one of the highest-ranking women in the Army, who was conducting an assessment of combat operations in the region. Sarah's squad leader had emphasized the importance of providing flawless security for this mission. Sarah had spent the previous evening preparing her equipment with the same meticulous care her grandfather had taught her years ago. Her rifle was a precision instrument, a customized M24 sniper weapon system that she had learned to know intimately. Every component had been checked and rechecked, from the scope mounts to the ammunition she had personally inspected and sorted. As the convoy moved through the valley, Sarah maintained constant vigilance through her scope. The terrain was perfect for ambushes, with countless hiding places among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Her spotter, Corporal Williams, no relation to her old drill sergeant, kept track of potential threats through high-powered binoculars while maintaining radio communication with the convoy. Movement at 2 o'clock. About 600 meters, Williams whispered. Through her scope, Sarah could see several figures moving among the rocks. They appeared to be carrying weapons and positioning themselves for an attack on the convoy route. I count 4, maybe 5 individuals, Sarah reported quietly into her radio. They're setting up what looks like an ambush position. The convoy commander acknowledged her report and began altering the route. But the insurgents had chosen their position well. There was no good alternate path through the narrow valley. Suddenly, the situation escalated dramatically. The insurgents opened fire on the convoy with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The lead vehicle was hit immediately, its engine smoking as the driver fought to maintain control. The convoy was trapped, with steep terrain on both sides preventing quick escape. Long Shot, this is Convoy 6. Came the urgent radio call. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Can you provide suppressing fire on the ambush site? Sarah's training took over. She identified the primary threat, a machine gun position that was pouring fire onto the trapped vehicles. The range was challenging, and the targets were partially concealed behind rocks. Wind conditions were tricky, with gusts coming down from the mountain peaks. But this was exactly what she had trained for. Her first shot struck the machine gunner center mass, immediately silencing the most dangerous weapon. The second shot eliminated another insurgent who was preparing to fire an RPG at the convoy. With the primary threats neutralized, the convoy was able to begin moving towards safer ground. But the engagement wasn't over. As the vehicles started to move, Sarah spotted additional insurgents moving to cut off their escape route. These fighters were positioned nearly 1,000 meters away, at the extreme range of effective small arms fire. Most snipers would have considered the shots too difficult given the conditions and circumstances. I've got movement blocking the exit route, Sarah reported. Long shots, but I think I can take them. How long? The convoy commander asked urgently. The vehicles were taking sporadic fire and needed to move soon. 30 seconds, Sarah replied, already adjusting her scope for the extended range. She accounted for wind, elevation, and the movement of her targets. The first shot was a miss, The bullet struck rocks just behind the insurgent, but Sarah had spotted her error immediately and made the necessary correction. The second shot dropped the lead insurgent. The third eliminated another fighter. Within moments, the remaining insurgents abandoned their positions and disappeared into the rocky terrain. The convoy was free to continue its movement to safety. As the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Sarah maintained her overwatch position until the convoy had cleared the danger area completely. It had been a textbook engagement, multiple precision shots under combat conditions that had saved American lives and allowed the mission to continue. Later that evening, back at the forward operating base, Sarah was cleaning her rifle when her squad leader approached with an unusual expression on his face. "Martinez, you need to report to the command post immediately." Full dress uniform. Sarah's mind raced as she quickly changed uniforms. Had she done something wrong? The engagement had been successful, but perhaps there had been some issue with her shooting that she wasn't aware of. She arrived at the command post to find several high-ranking officers waiting, including the base commander and, to her surprise, General Hayes herself. The general was a formidable woman in her 50s, with short gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. She looked at Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," the base commander began formally. "General Hayes wanted to speak with you personally about today's action." He gestured toward the general, who stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, I understand that your precision shooting was critical to the success of today's convoy security mission," General Hayes said. Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. "I wanted to hear from you directly what happened out there." Sarah recounted the engagement professionally, focusing on the tactical situation and her actions, rather than dramatizing the events. She described the target identification, range estimation, and shooting conditions without embellishment. Throughout her report, General Hayes listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of combat operations. When Sarah finished, there was a moment of silence. Then General Hayes asked, "Staff Sergeant, what's your background with precision shooting? How long have you been trained as a designated marksman?" "Ma'am, I completed sniper school 18 months ago, but I've been shooting since I was young. My grandfather taught me the basics, and then Sergeant Williams at basic training helped me adapt to military weapons and techniques." "Your grandfather was military?" "Yes, ma'am." "Marine Corps sniper?" "Vietnam veteran." General Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "And the shots you made today? The long-range engagements at nearly 1,000 meters. That's at the edge of what most snipers would attempt under those conditions. What made you confident you could make those shots?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Ma'am, the training I received taught me to know my capabilities and limitations. I knew the range was challenging, but I also knew my equipment and my own skills. The convoy needed those shots to be made, so I made them. The convoy commander tells me you called your shots in advance, told him exactly how long you needed, and then delivered precisely on time. That level of confidence comes from more than just training. That comes from someone who truly understands their craft." General Hayes paused and looked at the other officers in the room before continuing. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, I've been in this army for 28 years. I've worked with some of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. What I saw today, the precision, the tactical awareness, the calm professionalism under extreme pressure, that's not standard designated marksman work. That's Ranger-level training and execution." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Ranger-level training. The 75th Ranger Regiment was the Army's elite light infantry unit, known for having some of the most skilled and professional soldiers in the world. To have a general compare her work to Ranger standards was recognition beyond anything she had ever imagined. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor for your actions today," General Hayes continued. "But more than that, I'm going to make some calls when I get back to the Pentagon. The special operations community needs skilled snipers, and they need soldiers who can perform under pressure. You might be hearing from some people about opportunities to take your skills to the next level." As the meeting concluded and Sarah was dismissed, She walked back to her quarters in a daze. The girl who had been mocked for her rifle configuration during basic training had just been compared to Rangers by a general. The journey from that first disastrous day at the range to this moment seemed impossible to believe. That night, Sarah called her grandfather from the satellite phone available to soldiers. When she told him about the day's events and the general's words, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "I knew from the time you were 12 years old that you had something special. Today, you proved it to the world. Your grandmother and I are so proud we could burst." 3 months later, Sarah received orders that would take her to Fort Moore for Ranger assessment and selection. The same base where she had struggled through basic training would be where she would attempt to join the Army's most elite light infantry unit. The irony wasn't lost on her. On her last day at the forward operating base, Sarah visited the range where she had made those critical shots. She thought about the long journey from her grandfather's ranch in Texas to this remote mountain valley in Afghanistan. Every step had built on the previous one. Her grandfather's patient instruction, Sergeant Williams' demanding training, sniper school's technical precision, and finally the crucible of combat operations. As she prepared to leave for the next chapter of her military career, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that excellence wasn't about natural talent or luck. It was about dedication, continuous learning, and the willingness to push beyond what others thought possible. The teasing and doubts of basic training seemed like a lifetime ago, replaced by the quiet confidence that came from proven performance under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The girl from small-town Texas had become a soldier worthy of recognition from the highest levels of the Army. But more importantly, she had become the person her grandfather always knew she could be, someone who could be counted on when everything was on the line.